Good evening, everyone. It's Owen Sound City Council, March 2nd, 2020. It's 7 p.m. Council began in a closed session meeting today starting at 6:30. During the closed session, Council reviewed minutes from the closed session of the regular Council meeting held on January 27th, 2020. We discussed one matter regarding personal matters about an identifiable individual, respecting public appointments to boards and committees, and direction was provided to staff. We discussed one matter regarding a proposed or pending disposition of land by the municipality or local board, respecting land in the industrial park, and direction was provided to the city solicitor. Council also discussed one matter regarding information explicitly supplied in confidence by Canada, a province or territory, or a Crown agency, or any of them respecting a contribution agreement, and direction was provided to staff. Oops. So we're down to number 4 on the agenda, looking for additional business. Staff. Ms. Coulter.
Thank you, Worship. Just to comment on our official plan 5-year update.
Thank you. Others? Councillor Thomas.
I'll have an update on the Owen Sound Cultural Awards.
Going that way, Councillor Dodd.
Your Worship, I have two, one about the next Young Professionals Network event, and then a big happy birthday to Brianna Bloomfield for her big birthday today.
Wow, we're supposed to sing, where's, well, the candles may require a fire extinguisher. Anyone else? Councillor Tamming?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wonder, I failed to ask the Director of Operations, are we getting an update again tonight on the bridge, or is there nothing really to update us on? Just questions.
Through Your Worship, we hadn't planned on giving an update tonight. We plan on doing a staff report at the next Operations Committee, which will then tie into our scheduled tour of the bridge site for the next council meeting.
Okay. Anyone else? Councillor Kepke?
Nothing, Your Worship.
Nothing? Okay. And then I'll have one matter, I think, to speak to. So, disclosure of pecuniary interest, general nature thereof. Anyone? Councillor Gregg?
I do have one as it pertains to item number CS 20021 13A in the consent agenda.
Sorry, which one? 13.
Report
13A?
20-021 in 13A of the
13A.
consent
There
agenda.
we go. Good. Thank you. There wasn't anyone else. Number 6, confirmation of council minutes. Councillor Dodd.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Thomas, that the minutes of the regular council meeting held on February 10th, 2020, as printed, be adopted.
And any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? And Councillor Kepke? In favor? Councillor Kepke?
In favor.
Good, thank you. 6B.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Thomas, that the minutes of the special council meeting held on February 14th, 2020, as printed, be adopted.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Councillor Kepke?
In favor.
So that's carried. Number 6C.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Thomas, that the minutes of the special council meeting held on February 20th, 2020, as printed, be adopted.
All in favor? Councillor Kepke?
In favor.
Thank you. Down to number 7, motion to move council into committee of the whole.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Thomas, that City Council now move into committee of the whole to consider public meetings, deputations and presentations, public question period, matters arising from correspondence, reports of city staff, consent agenda, committee minutes, matters postponed, motions for which notice was previously given, and additional business.
All in favor? That is carried. Oh, sorry, Councillor Kepke?
In favor.
So that's carried. We're down to number 8, so we're now on committee of the whole. Number 8 in the agenda, we have no public meetings, no deputations. Correspondence received for which direction of council is required, and we have none. So, sorry, I missed 10. Public question period. Oh, does someone have a question? Please, I'll get you to step up to the microphone and push the Movi button. There you go.
Oh, there we go. So my name is Executive Director of the United Way. And I'm use the 15th is day across because 0314 and we're partnering well because farmers market for $4 in the morning.
So I'm worried that your microphone's cutting in and out, and everyone on home didn't hear that. So you just told us that Pi Day is March 14th, and there is a 5-kilometer run that starts at 7:30 a.m. from the market. From Runner's Dam and ends at the market. And then there's a pie will be, your favorite type of pie will be available, and it can be pre-ordered, especially for the runners. And that will be at the market.
The first 10 runners, their pie is sponsored by the Labour Council. The first 10 runners who come in.
So Labour Council's sponsoring the first 10 runners in that day, and that's Saturday, March 14th. So this is a fundraiser for United Way Canadian Mental Health Association, OSHARE, and it's sponsored by Runner's Den, Ginger Press Bookstore and Cafe.
That's where you get tickets, Runners Den, Ginger Press, closed for a week, from any one of our organizations.
Great, and so tickets are available for this. Good, thank you very much. Now, I do notice there's something in front of us. Do you have anything to do with that?
Well, I really feel bad for Councillor Kepke because of all the meetings to miss. Missing the pie council meeting.
Are you sure that Councillor Kepke is missing the pie? She's missing the pie. She's missing the pie that's in front of us, perhaps, but we really don't know. And there's no candles in it, so it's not for Ms. Bloomfield's birthday.
So this morning, OSHARE baked apple pie for you.
Great.
Well, pre-celebrate the upcoming Pie Day.
Great, thank you. Councillor Gregg's got his hand up there. Go ahead.
Just a question. You do a lot of walking, Francesca. Can people take part in this by walking and power walking?
Good. Any other questions? That's great. Thank you very much for coming in and presenting to us, and we'll look forward to the next presentation in a couple of months on maybe bicycling, like the best ride in Grey County or something like that. Great. Thank you. Any other questions from the public? Thank you. Okay, get you to push, Peter, I'll get you to try that button again. There we go.
Item 13A on the agenda tonight is the athletic locker request to use June McCarthy for the pop-up sale.
This
Company sells discounted sporting goods and is available on a direct negative impact on the sales of a such benefits for respect, or where they're located in the downtown area. Already affected area by the district builder. This doesn't affect the pay taxes, employee taxpayers, contributes to the city year-round, not just for 1 week. There are currently dozens of vacant retail locations available on the town.
Peter, I'm going to get you just to stop, because apparently the microphone isn't being picked up at all. I wonder if Travis can spin his around there.
Deep pie, so
You just chew quietly and we're all good.
Yeah, so if you want to go ahead and start over,
Okay.
Peter, with the next
Item
area.
13A on the agenda tonight is the Athletic Lockers request to use the Julie MacArthur Arena floor for a pop-up sale. This company sells discounted sporting goods, and their sale will have a direct negative impact on the sales of at least 7 businesses in Owen Sound, 4 of which are located in the downtown area, an area already affected by the bridge rebuilding. The businesses affected pay taxes, employ taxpayers, and contribute to the city year-round, not just for 1 week. There are currently dozens of vacant retail locations available in Owen Sound. Can you tell me what benefit it is to allow an out-of-town company to come in and cherry-pick sales for a week and contribute nothing to the city aside from a rental fee?
Councillor Gregg?
If I could, I would need to excuse myself from any discussion on that item.
Sorry, yeah, so that's the one that Councillor Gregg has already declared a pecuniary interest, so you want to bail now? Anybody in staff want to answer that? Mr. Ritchie?
Perhaps, Mr. Reid, if you wouldn't mind waiting till we get to 13A, certainly there'd be, I think, a fulsome discussion of council, but if you don't mind, at this time I'm not prepared to.
I suspect there's going to be a discussion on that.
Okay. I would also ask if there's a member of council who'd be willing to request that this be a recorded vote on this matter, so the taxpayers can see exactly which direction people have gone on this.
We'll see what happens at that point, but they've heard you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else from the public? Seeing none. No, I didn't. We're down to number 11. There is no correspondence received, which council was required to look after. I guess I already did that because I'd skipped when I missed public question period. Number 12A will be a report from Ms. Coulter with regard to potential sale of a portion of land.
Thank you, Worship. At your meeting in November of 2019, Council had considered a staff report regarding a request to sell a portion of parkland. If we could just go back. So the Recreation Parks and Facilities Master Plan is relatively new, and we have not undertaken a similar process in the past. So in order to tackle this, we put together a staff working group, including the city clerk, myself, as well as the manager of purchasing, risk, and asset management. We also consulted with the city solicitor. So the purpose of this report is just to be really clear on the process and methodology that we'll use to work through those 8 steps. So, yeah. The property, just as a reminder, is located on the north side of 23rd Street East, just past the French language Catholic school. It's about 1.3 acres in size, and the 2 parks, both Timber MacArthur Park, you'll see there is a linear park, and then we have Stony Orchard Park to the north. Combined, those are about 51 acres of parkland. In terms of the 8 steps, step 1 was really the council resolution back in November asking us to move forward. Sorry, if we can go to the 8 steps now, the next slide, thank you. Step 2 is assessing the current condition, and this is really an internal process, but this information will provide important context for the public. So the size of the land, the location, the site characteristics, official plan and zoning information, the use of the park, and then we will look at the park and playground proximity analysis included in our master plan, as well as photographs of the site. Third, we'll do a survey of residents within 500 meters of the park. So the intent of this step is really to gather information on how neighbors within that 500-meter area use the park. So the survey will collect data on who is the person or family responding, how they use the park, and then on data and features that may increase or decrease their use of the park going forward. I attached a draft survey as attachment 2 to the report. We would give both, we'll mail out a hard copy of the survey to people within 500 meters. They would fill it out on hard copy, or they would have the option of filling it out online. If someone that lived outside of that area wanted to fill it out, we wouldn't preclude that, but we would ask them through survey questions to identify that they live outside that area. We'd then hold a public meeting with the surrounding residents and stakeholders to discuss alternatives. And I've described for you how we would give notice. We would do a mail out, have a notice on our website and an ad in the Sun-Times. And once we have the background and the survey data complete, there would be a public meeting to look at that input and options. Step 5 is based on that public feedback, select a preferred alternative and present to council and committee. So we'll be presenting the findings from step 4, kind of an interim update. Step 6, develop a preliminary design and action plan. So staff are recommending that any use of this land would be restricted to residential. So 7 is holding a public meeting to discuss preliminary design and action. So staff don't feel it really is our job to do the design for the developer, but there may be conditions such as landscaping, maximum height, or other urban design matters that council would want to ensure are reflected in a future development, and some of those ideas would come through that public meeting. For example, there was some very good feedback at the time when council was looking at selling the 8th Street Reservoir about what the neighbors wanted to see in that development. And lastly, a final plan for council and committee, and alternatives could include not selling the land, or selling a modified portion of land. And the sale could include conditions on parameters for a sale, such as reinvesting any funds from a sale in improvements in the adjacent parkland, if that's what we hear through the process. If the decision at step 8 is to move forward, we do a subsequent report dealing with the city's land sale bylaw. So with that, Your Worship, the recommendation is that council receive the report and request that staff would move forward with the 7 remaining steps as outlined in the Rec Parks and Facilities Master Plan and described in Report CS 20-12.
Councillor Merton?
Through Your Worship, thank you, Pam, for outlining those steps. I was just wondering if we could also consider, based on the recent reports that we've received from Grey County, the homelessness plan, and the report We Are All Neighbors from Rent Safe Research, the possibility of considering the option of using parkland to address the known concerns of attainable, affordable housing within our community, whether that's exploring as an option within these steps, strategic partnerships with other levels of the government, as part of the whole package of, if we're considering selling parkland, can it be purpose-built or used, recognizing, and also to acknowledge that parkland's parkland, it's a valuable asset. We want to use it for our community, and if we're going to change the functionality, consider addressing what we know is a need in our community. So, we have the ability within the council to discuss changing zoning, to discuss high-density housing, to discuss lot size. So there are lots of opportunities around developments that could go there. So I respectfully request that that's a component within this analysis to be able to make a more fulsome decision as we go forward.
Ms. Coulter?
Thank you, Worship. In the first iteration of this report that the team had worked on, we actually had a draft RFP around the land sale. And then we said, and it included some of those things, there needed to be a benefit if we're going to sell this land, that sort of thinking. And so completely with you. But then we said, wait a minute, we're presupposing the outcome of the 8 steps. We might get to step 8 and council's going to say, based on the feedback that you've heard, pause, let's not sell this land. So that's why specifically there's the, says, if council determines they want to move forward, there would be a further report regarding the land sale process. So I think we can for sure do that, but it would be with the land sale piece, not really the public consultation piece, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Others?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Marion.
Okay, at what stages or at what step is the land actually offered for sale? And is this as a result of someone coming forward and asking for these lands to be sold?
Go ahead, Pam.
Through your worship, the land sale process in compliance with the land sale bylaw would only happen following a decision at the end of step 8. And yes, the November report on the land sale did say that it was, that the report was brought forward at the request of an individual with, or a company with respect to potential purchase of those lands.
Okay, so at the designing of the plan, is that done by the potential purchaser or the city?
Through you, your worship, it would be done by the purchaser in the future. So, but at this point, we're saying we would recommend to you that it be restricted to residential, working through those 8 steps. And then there would be a process going forward, a public process. There would be an official plan and zoning amendment required, so that has a public input element, but also the land sale piece. So how exactly is that structured? And we would want to bring forward a report to you on those details.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, others? Councillor Gregg?
Thanks, Mayor Bai. I guess my question is the accumulation of costs as we go through this process, and the report speaks to costs being borne by the purchaser, but have we got a ballpark on the subtotal or total dollar of costs that we might expect at the end of this process? My concern is we have spent, or we have invested, that's a better term, invested several million dollars in the last few years in servicing vacant land in the city, and we have lots of it currently serviced, awaiting development. And at this time, I'm just wondering, I'm more eager to see us get some action on the projects that are in the pipeline, the Sydenham Heights, the 8th Street, the reservoir property. There's various infill opportunities within the city right now. There's a former school to undergo rehabilitation. I have some trepidation then to us accumulating more costs and us then deciding at the end of 7 steps that, well, we don't want to proceed here, and then we just eat more costs because we decide not to sell the property. At this time, we just have invested a lot in other properties in the city, and we're all eager to see millions of dollars of development start to occur. And I think there's some hesitancy to not continue to incur more costs trying to develop more or get more serviceable for development.
So I think the question is there, what kind of cost is this process going to be?
Through your worship, the 8 steps, just looking at them quickly, it really is the notice cost. So we'll have an ad in the paper. The other costs really relate to staff time and effort. The other costs, legal costs, survey costs, appraisal, they would come along with that next phase, I would call it, with the actual land sale report. So yes, we did consult with the solicitor to make sure we were staying on side and not doing anything that was, not proper, but we do that on lots of reports and on matters. So.
Okay, Councillor Dodd.
Thank you, Worship. Just a clarifying point. Timber MacArthur Park is quite a big piece of land. So just to clarify to the public, because this has been a question that's brought up, this isn't on the escarpment. This is further off towards the school at St. Dominique, I believe.
Through your worship, that's correct. It's a piece of land that's at the west end of the terminus of 23rd Street East. If you go west from 9th Avenue on 23rd, past the French language school on the north side of the street, you come to a gate where the road ends, and these lands are just at the, on the right-hand side on that street.
Thank you. I just wanted to emphasize on that because there's been some comment about this being on the escarpment and it's not that piece of land. But I would move the recommendation as it currently states.
Okay, further discussion? Going to call the question, all in favor? That is carried.
In favor.
There we go. Thank you, Marion. 12B, report from Ms. Allen on tax policy.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to try to do this report from here so I have the microphone. Perfect. So this report was originally planned to come to Corporate Services on Thursday, but we canceled that meeting because of the impending winter storm, so we get to bring it to Council. Isn't that lucky for everyone? The purpose of this report is to address tax policy, and that adjusts ratios for the 2020 tax year. Unique to Owen Sound, we are responsible for our own tax policy. In most circumstances, when we have a two-tier system like we do in Grey County, the county takes care of the policy, and every other municipality within Grey County relies on the county to do their tax policy. We are the only the only municipality within Grey County that does our own. Tax ratios determine the weighting that we give to assessment within each tax class, and then ultimately tax rates are calculated on the weighted assessment. Before we get to ratios, it's important to understand the background and the environment that we're sort of working with when we set tax policy. Ultimately, our goal through this process is to calculate what will be our tax rates. Besides ratios, there are two key factors that make up that calculation, the budget and municipal assessment. And we want to be able to explain how we get from our total budget to a typical residential tax bill. So you'll recall back in January is when we approved our 2020 total municipal budget, and at that time, the total levy, so all of the funds required to provide our annual services, $30,800,000 rounded. And that represented a total increase of 2.7% over last year's levy. At budget time, we attempt to translate that to what it would then mean to the average taxpayer by estimating what the county's increase is, estimating the school board levy, and then also incorporating a piece for estimated growth. And at the time of budget, we estimated that the average taxpayer would see a 1.68% increase given all of those factors brought into the calculation. So as we're looking at tax policy, and since that is the increase that council approved at budget time within those parameters, we're working to stay close to that same percentage rate. Understanding that when we gave that percentage, it assumed we did not make any changes for tax policy. So there's lots of things that impact what a tax bill actually is, and this is just one of them. So in a world without assessment and ratios, you might simply take our total budget and divide it over the number of taxpayers to come up with what your individual tax bills are. But we don't. So in order to distribute the tax levy across taxpayers, we use municipal assessment. Municipal assessment is determined by MPAC, and for the most part, the city does not get involved in assessment or the assessment appeal process. We leave that between MPAC and the property owners. Assessment's role in explaining how our total levy increases translates to a tax bill increase is in changes. So there's two types of changes in assessment that impact our tax rates and the burden of taxation that an individual taxpayer experiences. The first type are valuation changes. Valuation changes are driven by changes in the real estate market over time, and they're reflected via reassessment and phased-in updates. They change how tax is distributed amongst existing taxpayers. So our most recent reassessment cycle came into effect in 2016. It would have been based on property values and data that was collected over the year preceding that, so 2016. And we're actually about to undergo our next update in 2021, and you may hear that MPAC is out there right now visiting properties and starting to generate the data that they will use to do their 2021 reassessment. When a property has an increase in assessment, that increase is phased in over 4 years, while any downward adjustments are recognized immediately. So even before we introduce our increased budget, our 2.7% increase in the municipal levy, or make any changes to ratios, changes in phased-in assessment over last year will impact how the burden of taxation is distributed through the total tax roll. So in order to determine how that change in valuation will impact different tax classes, and our focus is always what is the impact on the residential tax class, but we'll certainly try to show how it impacts others as well. We take the 2029 revised roll. So that's the roll that we receive at the end of 2029. It captures any growth that has happened in 2029 as a result of real growth, and we compare that to the 2020 returned roll. And the only difference between those two rolls will be there's 1 more year of phased-in assessment added on. So the impact between the end of 2019 and the beginning of 2020 should be able to quantify what that phased-in impact is. And in the report, unfortunately, I didn't put this table right into the presentation, but in the report, Table 9A shows what our total movement of tax burden is as a result of that phased-in tax shift. So if you have it in front of you, at the very bottom of Table 9A, you'll see that the net change is $7, and that's just a result of rounding. But we see approximately $100,000 shifting off residential and onto other tax classes, and that reflects roughly a 0.5% change in residential tax burden. This could be translated to say that compared to other tax classes, as in the last assessment cycle, commercial and industrial, which would compare residential compared to commercial and industrial, is increasing, the value is increasing at a slower rate. That doesn't necessarily reflect what we're seeing right now in the market, and that's where I would just have that caveat that that information was collected in 2016. Since then, we've had a bit of a real estate boom, so I can expect that perhaps in the next reassessment cycle that we're about to undergo, we may see some of that burden shift back onto residential if our residential property values are increasing faster than commercial and industrial property values are increasing. It doesn't come into effect now. We're still sort of working on that 2016 information. However, for 2020, that room that's created by tax shift creates room within the residential tax class that we can use when we look at tax policy. So we may be able to adjust some ratios in other tax classes to move back into that residential room that's been created. Hopefully that comes back. The other thing that happens in assessment is we have real growth. So as new properties are added to the tax roll, they relieve the existing taxpayers from the burden of tax. In a simple analogy, if you're sharing a bill with a group of friends and a third friend shows up, but your bill stays the same, you now have 3 people paying for that same bill. It gets cheaper for everyone because you're sharing it amongst more people. So adding new property reduces the burden on existing taxpayers. The total real growth in assessment for over last year, I would say, in 2019, is $20 million. It's almost entirely in the residential tax class, and that represents approximately 1%. And that is also nearly double the growth that we realized in 2018. So that's a positive thing, and that creates that buffer of $216,000 that we can sort of our levy could go up $216,000 and we would have a 0% increase to the residential taxpayer. So it creates that buffer and it allows us to have that 2.7% levy increase come down to 1.98%. So then we talk about ratios. The municipality has the authority to establish tax ratios for non-residential tax classes. The residential ratio is always 1. So in the example here that I've shown in this table, and this is the same table I used sort of last year to try to explain this, is imagine we had 6 taxpayers, and each of those taxpayers' properties is assessed at exactly the same value, $100,000. If we didn't have ratios and we took that total municipal budget of, in this case, what our budget is $30,800,000, I've used $30,800, and put it against those 6 taxpayers, everyone would pay the same, roughly $5,100. However, we have these ratios that come in and they change the weight of assessment. So now, and I've used our actual 2020 ratios here, you see when we apply those different ratios and divide the total levy over the weighted CVA, you can see how the annual taxes for each of those taxpayers has now changed. And so what we're going to do with tax policy is we're going to adjust our starting ratios. We're going to adjust those starting ratios to meet some of our objectives, which I cover in the next slide. And we're going to change the way that that distribution of tax works, even though we don't necessarily control municipal assessment, and our municipal levy is what it is. So the objectives that I've worked with in coming up with the ratios that we're proposing are, 1, to move towards the county ratios. So when we first joined the county in 2001, I'm going to look at Wayne in case I'm not saying this correctly, had we had jumped and joined the county ratios immediately, it would have been extremely punishing for the residential taxpayer. So the province or whomever the body was that guided us through that amalgamation, they allowed us to maintain our own ratios with the expectation that over time we would move towards the county ratios. I'm not sure that there's ever been a committed time frame or even what we would do if we got there. Would we give up that authority or would we continue to set our own? But that is ultimately the direction that we've been moving towards. Another objective is to reduce exposure to significant changes as a result of negative growth or downward valuation, to encourage economic development and limit the impact of levy increases in commercial and industrial tax classes and existing multi-residential, and to make sure we meet legislative requirements. So this slide just shows you what the county ratios were at the end of 2019. And where our ratios are. The county has not adjusted their ratios for at least 10 years from my review. However, they did drop that farm ratio just last year from 0.25 to 0.24. We did not adjust our farm ratio, so there is a difference there. But you can see what our total difference is. And then the total municipal CVA, I've added that in. That's our CVA, or that's our assessment, just to sort of see what the impact of change would be. So if there's a very large amount of assessment, then any small change is going to have a much greater impact on us. Whereas, for example, if we were to change the farm ratio, it does have a much smaller total assessment, so the impact on other tax classes wouldn't be significant. To reduce exposure to risk, assessment changes are amplified when a tax ratio is greater than 1. So for using an example of commercial, if we use the city's starting ratio of 1.78 for the commercial tax class, if a property appeals their assessment and ultimately the ARB, the Assessment Review Board, decides, yes, this commercial plaza is worth $100,000 less than what MPAC has assessed them at, when we apply that $100,000 change, it actually results in a $178,000 increase to our total assessment base on which we calculate taxes. So it has a greater effect than just that change that ARB has come up with. So as long as we're reducing that ratio, we're protecting ourselves from related to this tax year, any future ARB decisions that may come back and say, hey, in 2019, we're reassessing this property downwards, if we're able to reduce our ratios, the impact of those changes will be less than they would be if we didn't. For economic development, it's tough to argue that reducing tax burden would not be looked at favorably by potential new and existing commercial and industrial properties. I'm not sure that it's necessarily proven that taxes are directly correlated to demand. However, like I said, I don't think you could argue that it would look bad. And then finally, there's legislation that directs what we can do here. So the province prohibits municipalities from increasing ratios above what is required to maintain class revenue neutrality. So we can't just start ratcheting our commercial and industrial ratios back up. That being said, in a tax reassessment year, if they come and we do see a very large shift as a result of reassessment, we do have some ability to soften that by increasing ratios so that on a class-wide basis, the total burden is constant, I should say. So that's the background. Now, this is the analysis that we went through in order to come up with what the proposed ratios are. And the proposed ratios are in the recommendation in this report, and they're also summarized here. I won't go through how we came up, all the different calculations that we did to come up with sort of what works, but what I can show you here is we've got our starting ratios in the first column, and then we've got our proposed ratios in the second column. So the third column just shows how those ratios are changing, and then ultimately what the impact is on the tax rates for those classes. So as you can see here, by dropping the ratios in multi-residential, commercial, and industrial, we're effectively dropping the tax rate in those classes as well, and it ultimately, prior to any changes in our budget or anything else, it results in a 1.5% increase on the residential taxpayer. And then what that means, once we apply that with our levies and a typical property with phased-in assessment change brought into the equation, is it results in a 1.82% increase for the average residential taxpayer. And you can see here, we've also shown for improved multi-residential, so that's sort of any existing multi-residential. I don't know what the year threshold was for that they switched over to new multi-res. We'll say 2010-ish, just to be. But anyways, any new multi-residential properties that come onto the tax roll have a ratio of 1. These are multi-residential properties that existed prior to that new multi-residential tax class, and they've got their own ratio that we're slowly bringing down. Occupied commercial and industrial. So despite that we had an overall levy increase of 2.7% and that we made those ratio changes that basically shifted the burden of tax off of those other classes onto residential, we're still able to show that the average residential household is going to see a total tax increase of only 1.82%. And in doing that, we're also keeping the multi-residential tax rate basically at 0. It's at 0.07%. Commercial tax rates have actually come down, and industrial tax rates, we have managed to pair that ratio with the county ratio, and we're seeing a total decrease of 10% in the industrial tax rate. This slide is complicated, but I'll just walk through. It shows sort of the different things that we're utilizing in order to use up that room and make those strides, I would say. So the very first column shows what the distribution of the total levy is, so that's municipal and county and school board. And then the next slide shows the phased-in shifts as a result of valuation changes. And right here we see that because of phase-in changes and valuation changes in the county, before we even add in the county levy, we're seeing $66,000 of county levy shift off of the city of Owen Sound. That's more room that we're able then to use up when we do this tax policy in order to keep that residential tax rate down. Also, we have $162,000 worth of education levy shifting off of Owen Sound, and that's because, just like the county levy uses CVA of all of Greek County to distribute their taxes, the province looks at the province as a whole when they're distributing education taxes. So as we have much more growth down in Toronto, they're actually pulling more of that education levy down in those areas that are growing so quickly. The tax ratio shifts, since the county is, this is assuming that the county is not making any changes to their tax ratios, so that shows 0 here. I will discuss just towards the end some potential changes that the county is looking at and what the impact would be on the city of Owen Sound. And then finally, we bring in our total levy change. So you can see with the county, despite that the levy is going up by $100,000, there's actually $66,000 shifting off of us. So the net change is closer to $30,000. That's complicated. I don't know if there's any questions.
Go ahead.
Through your worship, Kate, a few council meetings ago, we did have some presentation from farmers. Now, you didn't touch the farm ratio at all.
We have not
Is there?
We have not made any changes to our farm ratio, no.
Is there a reason for leaving it the same or not making a change?
When I looked at the objectives that are here, there are other ratios that we have much more room to make up in order to get closer to the county, and it didn't address any of these other items. So it wasn't a top priority when we have some of these higher priorities being commercial, industrial, multi-res, that we wanted to put more attention to.
Others? John, go ahead.
I commend you very much to your worship, Madam Director, for this very cogent explanation, okay? Did I hear you say industrial taxes are going down 10%? I didn't quite understand that. Over what period of time?
The industrial tax rate is going down 10%. And then this slide just shows for a typical industrial property. So the typical industrial property does have a slight increase in CVA over last year as a result of phased-in assessment through the last cycle. But as well, their taxes are estimated to drop by 9%.
Councillor Dodd?
I'll save my question till after.
Okay. Anyone else? Marion, have you got any questions?
Nothing, Your Worship.
Okay.
There is, sorry,
Go ahead.
there is one more slide here, and I just sort of wanted to provide this to you and for our councillors that go to county council. This slide shows what the impact would be to the city for some changes that the county is considering. And I don't believe these considerations have been presented to county yet, so I'm not necessarily sure that they're exactly looking at a 10% reduction or exactly anything, but I just wanted to do some sensitivity analysis should the county bring forward some potential changes to their own tax policy. So for your reference, a 10% reduction in the county multi-residential ratio would shift $60,000 off of the city-county levy. A 10% reduction in the industrial ratio would shift $5,600 off of the city-county levy, and a further reduction in the farm tax ratio from 0.24 down to 0.23 would actually bring $13,000 back into the county, or into the city from the county levy. And the final column there just shows what that impact would be on the average residential taxpayer.
Okay, any other questions? No. So, Ms. Allen, first of all, something that seems to confuse people, they get their new assessment for their house and it assessed the value of their house more than it had been, and so they think their taxes are automatically going up. But if everyone's assessment goes up, we're maintaining our approximately $30 million budget, therefore it gets spread the same way and taxes wouldn't change, correct?
Correct.
Unless somebody's house went up a lot relative to everyone else's stayed the same or came down, then it would go up.
And that really is the key, is how does the value of your property change relative to the other properties within your tax class?
Multi-residential, commercial, industrial, and large commercial all continue to pay at a higher tax rate than residential, and farm is about a quarter of residential. Few years ago...
The weight of their assessment.
The weight of their assessment.
Is a quarter of what the residential.
Yeah, I got to be careful because we're not talking about necessarily dollars, but the rate of their assessment. A few years ago, there was a lot of complaints that our commercial and residential tax rates were extremely high, some of the highest in the province. And there was an argument at the time that we weren't getting investment because our taxes were so high in those areas. So approximately over the last almost 20 years, we have slowly brought those down. Maybe this is more a question for Wayne. We've brought those down. It's my understanding, are we now sort of into the middle of the batch of our comparative municipalities for commercial, industrial, large industrial? So when we look at, instead of being one of the most expensive places to operate a business, now we're into the middle of the average of most of our other municipalities that we'd compare to?
I would say, Your Worship, we are still slightly above our comparators. With the moves that Ms. Allen is recommending, you will certainly get much more in line with them. And if we continue this trend, absolutely, we'll be there very shortly. But I'd say currently in 2019, we're still a little higher than the comparators we're trying to get to.
More for the commercial then.
But we're close.
And so this year will be the first time in industrial that we have finally matched the county after 18 years of working on it and chipping away. So that's a pretty big thing to celebrate. Any other questions from anyone else? Councillor Gregg.
I'm like Councillor Dodd, I was going to ask them after, but it's kind of phrased like this is a perfect time to ask them now. But I do have a couple points, actually, just to address your last questions, Mayor. In retrospect, or just to provide a little bit of comparison, the couple cities that I had jotted down here as to how we're comparing. Aurelia, which does not have an upper tier municipality because that impacts it, but Aurelia's industrial occupied rate is 2.2644, and we were at 2.33, looking to go to the 1.85. However, we do have county on top of that. Commercial in Aurelia, 1.939, and we're at 2.174, so we're still high. Orangeville, which is part of Dufferin County, commercial full is 0.9970. Again, we're at 2.174, and several other decimal placements. As well, industrial, 1.7966, and we're looking at going down to 1.85, I think. So we are scaling it closer, but I mean, some of those direct comparators, it still suggests that, you know, we're working hard here, and unfortunately our residents are continuing to take the brunt of this because, I mean, that's shown in the mill rate, which is effectively 1.254 moving forward. So it just continues to emphasize to us the importance of growth and adding assessment in this municipality to help deflect those costs that in a lot of cases are fixed income households in Owen Sound that continue to see these 2% or 3% increases every year, and it's outpacing what they are getting for annual increases. The second thing I would just note, and this I think is important, in commercial, particularly in industrial, and it needs just to be communicated to a lot of people, but individuals who are lessees and they're in long-term leases, as we decrease commercial and industrial tax rates, it's important that the lessees are aware of that in our community, because in many cases, they could be just paying a fixed property tax value as part of their lease. And if they're not aware that we've been scaling these down over the years, we know that the lessor has been benefiting from that. So it's important that people in the community that are part of the commercial and the industrial are aware that over several years here, we've been scaling these back. And when they're working with their lessors, if it's not part of or inclusive with the rate and that it's over and above, they should be aware that we've been making considerable progress on reducing those rates.
Thank you. Councillor Dodd, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Worship. I'm just going to be really quick. Everyone else has done a great job at explaining this. I love numbers, but this is always a doozy when we get to corporate services. I guess the biggest thing when we want to try to make that point of, we're seeing that reduction of 9% off the industrial tax rate, what's the significance of that? The significance of that is if when you're too weight heavy, when you have 2 times or at one point 2.5 times what the residential rate was, and you had a loss of an industry, it would have a greater effect on the next year's taxes because you're losing basically 2 or 2.5%, or 2.5 times what the regular rate would be. So when we start seeing those reductions back down, it's actually adding another layer of protection and safety for the residential taxpayer for future years.
Good, thanks. You're going to move that while you got your microphone on?
Sure. I'll move that recommendation. Thank you.
And anyone else wish to speak to this? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much, Kate. Marion, go ahead.
In favor.
Yep, Marion's in favor. Thank you, Kate. That's a biggie every year, and it's hard to explain. You do a great job, so thank you. 12C, Mr. Kafalis, I think, with regard to bus terminal access.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through Your Worship, City staff is asking City Council to pass a bylaw to authorize the Mayor and City Clerk to execute agreement on behalf of the corporation allowing Casper Transportation to use the City of Owen Sound's transit terminal. Casper Transportation is a new transit service that provides transit services from Owen Sound to Guelph and return twice daily. The operator has requested permission to use the city's transit terminal as a pick-up and drop-off location for its passengers. We have similar agreements with another provider, private contractor, Grey Bruce Airbus, that provides a shuttle service from the Grey Bruce counties to Pearson International Airport. And we believe that we'll be trying to treat everyone equally and provide the same access to our terminal as we do for other providers.
Discussion, motions. Councillor Gregg.
Thanks, everybody. I'd move the recommendation as it is. This is furthering the opportunity for people in the community to be able to travel to other points at a much more affordable rate, and hopefully to do it in a more environmentally sound manner as well.
So any further discussion? Call the question. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Marion?
In favor.
There we go. Now it's carried. 12D, rural update. Deputy Mayor O'Leary from Grey County Council.
Thank you, Your Worship. Overland Custom Coach had the successful bid to supply 6 buses to Grey County for the community transportation project. 5 buses will be in operation, and the 6th bus will act as a spare. 2 of the buses will travel Highway 10 from Owen Sound to Orangeville, 2 along Highway 26 from Owen Sound to Blue Mountain, and 1 operating Highway 6 from Owen Sound to Wyerton. All buses can accommodate 24 passengers or 18 passengers plus 2 personal mobility device seats. A future report with more detail and route options is forthcoming. Details for the Community Homelessness Prevention Initiative were released for 2020-21. The initiative aims to prevent, address, and reduce homelessness by improving access to adequate, suitable, and affordable housing. There's $1,888,000 in provincial funding will be provided to Grey County. The program has a neutral impact on the county as no levy funds are required. The Grey County Cycling and Trails Master Plan draft has been released. There will now be a 30-day period where comments will be reviewed and incorporated into a final plan. that will be brought back to County Council along with recommendations for implementation. The draft plan has been developed with input from county staff, local and municipal staff, and elected officials, local stakeholders, tourism representatives, public health officials, residents, and decision makers. Grey County has received $530,652 from the provincial government in 2018 to go towards developing a cycling and trails master plan as well as paving 22 kilometers of paved shoulders on county roads. Grey County has contributed $53,000 into this plan. And finally, the response time performance plan results were released from paramedic services. The county is required to report annually to the Ministry of Health by the 31st of March of each year on the response time performance achieved under the previous year's plan. We are very fortunate to have the Grey County Paramedic Service as they have met or exceeded all targets and are continually looking for ways to improve. That's my report.
Any questions? Not seeing any questions, thanks. So we'll move on. We have the consent agenda.
Through you, Your Worship, on the consent agenda this evening is a report respecting the Athletic Locker Vendor Show, minutes for receipt from the DIA Board, and several businesses received their license, including Our Handcrafted Chocolate Truffles, a home occupation at 313 3rd Street West, Sydenham Health and Wellness at 954 First Ave West, Unit 2, the Owen Sound Hub at 279 10th Street East, Kim's Pretty Parlor at 747 2nd Ave East, Shoppers Drug Mart has a new owner, Driver's Seat Owen Sound at 1260 2nd Ave East, Unit 2, Bloomers at 946 3rd Ave East, and Opportunity Bridal received a hawker and peddler's license. Lastly, there's the council information package. A full listing is available at 13D.
Thank you. Councillor Gregg.
May that be save and accept item 13A?
Yes. So basically, Councillor Gregg's asking for that to be pulled out so that he can be involved in the rest of the consent agenda, and that'll be set aside for us to consider after. So with regard to everything other than 13A and the consent agenda, all in favor? That is carried. In favor, says Marion. We don't have the microphone on her, but did we not have minutes? We have minutes from the DIA, yes, 13B. Go ahead.
Thank you, Worship. We had a presentation from Michelle Palmer, Manager of Purchasing Risk and Asset Management. She made reference to case law that is reviewed when making purchasing decisions and noted the various purchasing and procurement guidelines that the city follows and the steps involved in the procurement process. We also had a presentation from the Manager of Community Development and Marketing regarding 4 key events taking place in the downtown core in 2020. And there were final approvals issued for business licenses in the DIA. Eternal B at 791 First Avenue East, Touchzilla Computer Services at 823 3rd Avenue East, Fabulous Hair Extension and Beauty Supply at 154 10th Street East, and CJ's Hair Studio at 299 8th Street East. Thanks, Worship.
Any questions? Seeing none. So that's everything there. So just as Councillor Gregg's leaving, if we can come back up to 13A, which is the report from the Facilities Booking Coordinator with regard to a athletic locker vendor show, April 13th to 20th at the Julie MacArthur Regional Rec Center. Did you have your hand up there, Councillor Dodd?
Just for my consent agenda motion, but that's all.
Oh, sorry, I skipped that beat, didn't I? Just hold on to it for a second. Yeah, I blanked. We'll wait until Councillor Gregg comes back in, and then we'll deal with the motion to approve everything. Yeah, okay, so save and accept for 13A. So 13A, who wants to speak to it? Go ahead, Councillor Merton.
Through your worship, we have been promoting the downtown because of the 10th Street Bridge. We've put money into a marketing and promotional campaign, which has been recognized, actually, and applauded for it. We currently are in an exceptional circumstance because of the 10th Street Bridge renovation. And in addition, we have also a large shopping mall, which is being challenged to keep stores in place. I understand about competition. I understand that we have to proceed with caution whenever we want to put limits around businesses. I am wondering, considering that this is the year or two, Mr. Kafalis, of the 10th Street renovation, if we could consider this as exceptional circumstances and ask not to proceed with this particular venture or others that may jeopardize the survival of our downtown merchants. If we're paying tax dollars to promote and encourage people to come downtown, while on the other hand, we are approving businesses to come into town that put those businesses at risk, I'm just sensing a disconnect between the messaging. So wondering if there's a possibility that we could consider a motion as an exceptional circumstance to not move forward with this particular request.
So are you moving to not approve the recommendation? Is that your motion then?
I'm open to hearing more conversation before a motion goes forward, if that's within the approved process.
Sure. Okay. Other discussion? Councillor Dodd?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just be looking for clarification then. Would we be also being up for discussion the opportunity bridal hawker and peddler's license at Quality Inn? It would be doing the same challenging of the same businesses of bridal wear, menswear, tuxedos. So are we going to be challenging that as well? Will we be looking at things like our contractor trade show? No, our suppliers, our contractors that utilize those services, those are out. Those aren't all necessarily all local businesses. So are we going to look at that as well? Are we going to look at Ribfest? Are we going to look at the Challenges restaurants? The situation that we're in is if you declare on one, we better be prepared to declare on all. Because as we sit here, we're never supposed to make the judgment that you can only affect one person. We're all equal. Everything is done the same way. So if we're going to do this to that, are we looking at all the other sources? So I don't feel we as municipal councillors at this stage should be getting involved in that situation. I understand the consequences of what's going on and the severity of the issues that are going on in the local business. But if that is what's going on, then I think we need to look at, are we going to continue to offer hawker and peddler's licenses? Because those are allowing, when a trade show comes in, when big guy fireworks or whatever it is that's up at Heritage Place Mall, those are the ones who are using hawker and peddler's license that aren't necessarily a local business, but coming in here and getting businesses. So is that what we're looking at? That'd be my asking for clarification on that.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, in a second, Marion, I'll come back to you.
So I'm with Councillor Dodd here. You only touch the surface. I mean, the number of vendors we bring in here, the hottest street sale under the sun, summer folk, the market. Last summer we had a golf guy at the Bayshore Community Center. He had everything, like golf clubs. He had shirts, pants, shorts, socks, balls, everything. Nobody came to the podium. Why are we, is there something wrong with this one vendor? Like, why are we picking on one vendor? You know, everyone knows I sit on the DIA, and I'm passionate about our downtown. I feel comfortable saying, never in the history of Owen Sound has our downtown had input from the city of Owen Sound like they do right now. It's incredible what the city is doing for our downtown. Right out of the blue, Mr. Ritchie says, you know what, I'm going to send the snowplow down the sidewalk. They didn't ask for it. He just offered it. We had 23 inches of snow last Friday. Dennis Kafalis has the crew coming in on Wednesday night. That's the quickest turnaround I've seen, taking the snowbanks out of our main street. Yes, the bridge is out and times are tough, but you know, that's no fault of ours. It has to be done. The number of phone calls I got from downtown merchants is zero about this. In fact, I think it's a kick in the stomach that you brought it up, because this city has partnered with our downtown. We're paying for half of the consultant fees for the rebranding. We do all these downtown events trying to build up our downtown. That's why I've got no calls. Because I think our downtown merchants, most of them, realize how lucky they have it, that they've got a council that wants to support them in every way we can, and that's what we do. So I'll move the recommendation that's on the table.
Okay, thank you. Can you put your mic in front of the phone for Marion? I'm going to go to you next, Marion. Go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to comment on the amount of rental fee that's being paid to the city by this vendor, which is over $6,000. There's also a hawker and peddler license required, which is substantially higher than a regular business license, and the clerk can comment on that. But I don't want Owen Sound to be seen as not wanting businesses here. Who knows, maybe this is successful and it may spark a business. I really don't think that we should be stopping all of these, and other councillors have mentioned a lot of the other shows or vendor sales that take place, and you can't do it for one and not others. So I certainly would ask the clerk to comment on the business license fee.
Thanks, Brandon. Do you know the business license fee for that?
A general business license is $150, a hawker and peddler is $300.
$150, hawkers and peddlers, $300? Good, thank you. Other discussion? Thanks, Marion. Go ahead, Richard.
Thanks, Your Worship. I did hear from a DIA board member through my council email this morning expressing concern at this, and so I read the proposal a little closer, thought a bit about the same discussion that we had last year, and, you know, I understand Councillor Merton's position, and I understand Councillor Dodd's position. I think he's put it about as clearly as it could be put. It's a slippery slope, and I don't think our job as a council is to, well, I suppose our job as a council is to occasionally decide who's going to rent our facilities. But at the end of the day, I think that, you know, our goal is to rent those facilities as often as we possibly can, because they are expensive facilities to run. All of the taxpayers are paying for them, and we need the money that they generate to help keep them open, really. So, you know, you know, last year I talked about the discussion I witnessed as a news reporter in 1987 when the first sausage cart vendor wanted to have a downtown street cart in Owen Sound, and all the restaurants in town came and protested that $50 hawkers and peddlers license because it was going to take business away from their businesses. And I don't think it ever did. You know, it took a few years before we got the sausage cart, and I might have visited it once or twice myself, but I also continued to visit downtown restaurants. So I think Owen Sound is the kind of community that has lots for everyone and has lots of support for the community for all businesses.
Okay, others? Councillor Merton, go ahead.
I appreciate the feedback. March 4th, 2019, I had brought forth a motion requesting that we ask staff to develop a policy to outline the principles around ad hoc vendor requests. That motion was turned down. Based on the conversation last year and this year, I'm wondering if we need to rethink and have a policy clearly outlining that we are open for business and that these requests don't have to be approved by us. If our policy is that we will let staff determine, and it's a process by which the requests go through staff, then it would negate this conversation or others because we've allowed staff to make that determination. Is that something we wish to consider as a process issue?
So that would be like all business licenses then wouldn't come through council?
I think the hawkers and peddlers were primarily the ad hoc ones that this conversation is around.
Ms. Coulter, did you have comments? Go ahead.
So, Your Worship, and perhaps the city clerk will want to add to this, but on our community services, community development work plans this year is working on a delegation of authority. So where council, very much like a street closure, you've closed it, you've closed a street one time, it comes to council for a new event. And then subsequent years, if the event for all intents and purposes is the same as last year and nothing's changed, it would be delegated to staff. So we're working on bringing that forward with the clerk's department to council to allow staff to approve those rentals, not street closures in this case, that would be repetitive and nothing new.
So that could be World Festival, it could be Summer Folk, it could be. Okay. Other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. So that was Deputy Mayor O'Leary's motion to move the recommendations. All in favor? Seeing a whole bunch of hands go up. Councillor Kepke?
In favor.
There we go. So it's carried. Well, if we can get Councillor Gregg to come back in. We're down to 14A, which is the minutes of the Accessibility Advisory Committee. That's the first one.
Do you want me to go back and?
Oh, sorry.
move the motion for
Yes,
13B
yeah,
to-
okay. So, Councillor Gregg, probably when you ran out of the room, I realized that we didn't actually have the motion to approve everything in the consent agenda, save and except 13A. So, go ahead,
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, Worship. Move by myself that City Council receives items 13B to 13D on the consent agenda dated February 10th, 2020.
There we go. Now I'll call the question again. All in favor? So that's carried.
In favor.
Thanks, Mary. So now we can go down to 14A, which is, I think, Councillor Gregg's presenting Accessibility Advisory.
Can do that. At our recent meeting in February, the new committee for 2020 elected Christine Farrell as committee chair. Christine's very well known to the members and to the community. So we had a few reports that I'll briefly touch upon. Review of our mobility transit from 2019. We had 7,130 transit trips on the mobility bus. That's down slightly from 7,175 in 2018. The decrease in trips and the increase in unaccommodated persons is attributed to the 10th Street Bridge closure, so that's not a surprise to anyone. We had an update from our Director of Operations on the provision of free bus passes for visually impaired individuals. Similar programs to this have ceased in other communities since inception many decades ago. The committee has asked for a follow-up report to examine the potential for a subsidized bus pass program. So we'll have a report come forward through operations later in the year. That'll be the first point I'll go through is that operations has oversight on the transit. And I might mention, I mean, our transit does not work at a full cost recovery formula as it is now. It's already subsidized, so that's just something to be aware of as well. We had a report for information received from the CBO, from the chief building official on section 3.8 barrier-free design changes in the new act. And the committee also approved 2 site plans which were presented, one for the McWickwadong Native Culture Resource Center, which is the old Dufferin Public School, and the staff delegated Hermosa Salon, located north of probably about 12th Street on 2nd Avenue East. So I'd ask for council's approval of those minutes.
Any questions? Seeing none, all in favor? That's carried. Thanks, Marion. 14B, Community Services Committee, I think Councillor Thomas is presenting.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'll present these on behalf of Councillor Kepke, who was elected Chair of the Operations Committee at our first meeting. The first part of the meeting, we had a short committee orientation presentation 61 minutes, but wow, has that department got a lot going on this year. I'm not even going to try and go through all of it for everybody, but they are busy, busy, busy. We dealt with a lot of other interesting things during that meeting, including the Greenwood Cemetery Master Plan recommendations. I'm not going to go through all of the changes. It's certainly all available on the city's website, but I will just point out that a big part of the focus was on creating a natural burial section in the cemetery, and a total of 82 lots will be designated as the natural burials section. And for people who are interested, all of that is available on the website. We also had a report from the chief building official regarding transforming and modernizing the delivery of Ontario's building code, and there are a number of changes proposed, and he has created a document responding to each of those changes, which will go forward on behalf of the city. We also had another report, which I did want to highlight, from our CBO, and it was the January 2020 building updates, and we have a total of 21 building permits were issued in January of 2020 with a construction value of $1.3 million, and that's an increase of 15% over the same month in 2019. So, you know, it's great news for the city that the trend for development continues. Your Worship, I'll move that we accept those minutes.
Questions? Councillor Burton?
Through your worship, this is regarding the Greenwood Cemetery and the component of the tree maintenance, removal, and replacement on a priority level, item 4.2.6.1. Last October, through a public request through me, I had an email conversation with Community Services regarding the Vimy Oaks legacy saplings and the possibility of the city participating in obtaining Vimy Oak to honor our veterans. I know that they're currently investigating the possibility of having that done, but I thought this would be a good time to discuss this with the public, just to be aware that it's a possibility if Greenwood is an appropriate planting place and if they would thrive. It would be helpful to also consider if it's a possibility and if Adam Parsons feels that they would be a good addition to the cemetery and the Greenwood tree planting, to encourage a celebration or an acknowledgement ceremony with and participating with the Legion to honor the veterans. So if we are able to purchase the saplings, and if the city would consider linking with the Legion for an acknowledgement ceremony, that would be excellent. These saplings do cost money. They're not inexpensive. I'm hopeful that there's a budget allocation for trees, new trees. If not, perhaps it's something we could approach the public for consideration of donation to assist with this particular venture. So I would make that request.
Just in response to that, we have one. It's in the backyard of the Billy Bishop Museum. It was unveiled in 2017 by Lieutenant Governor Elizabeth Dowdeswell. So we actually have one already. It's there.
Through you, Worship, just kind of recalling our email discussion from a bit of time ago. The trees were available. I think Mr. Parsons had indicated that the soil conditions at the cemetery were suitable for that type of tree, and that we do have a budget at the cemetery that would allow us to purchase that tree, and we can certainly reach out to the Legion around some sort of recognition, perhaps around Remembrance Day, if that's Council's wish.
Okay. Go ahead. So we're talking about community services minutes. Go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Mayor Boy. I'm going to keep talking about trees. There's, in the work plan, a comment to update the shade tree bylaw. In the last year or so, there's been discussion at the provincial level about mandating the urban tree canopy program. Where's that at? And if that's been something the province is deeming that it has to be done, is this action aligning with that? Okay.
Other questions? Seeing none, call the question, which is for approval of the minutes of community services from February 19th, 2020. All in favor? That is carried.
In favor.
Thanks, Marion. Operations Committee, February 11th.
Last but not least.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was honored to be elected Chair of the Operations Committee for the next year. We covered a whole lot of ground, so you'll have to bear with me. As we had some new public members on the committee, we received a barn burner of a presentation from the Director of Public Works and Engineering on the committee's mandates and responsibilities. There was a deputation from Carl Sider, who is the risk management official at Grey Sauble Conservation. He spoke to the committee about source water protection, specifically our source protection plan, which is required by the province. To explain that very quickly, the source protection plan is a series of plans and policies to address 21 drinking water threats, like, for example, a fuel spill, around our water intake zones. Staff gave us an update on the airport. Notably, an RFP is going out for the demolition of the existing storage building as planned, and next steps will be coming forward. We received an update on our waste management programs. So the provincial average for waste diversion was 49.7%. For comparison, Owen Sound's diversion rate in the fourth quarter of last year was 59.86%. We also received the 2019 transit update. Ridership was down only slightly, which was a pleasant surprise for me because I thought with the 10th Street Bridge closure that ridership would be down significantly. The good news is I was wrong. The bulk of our evening was spent on two reports from water and wastewater, the Drinking Water Quality Management Standard and the Wastewater Quality Management Standard. I could go on for hours, just like Matt did. I'm not going to do that, though. I think the best way for me to show how high quality our water and wastewater treatment facility is to give an example. So, on the average typical day, our water treatment plant it treats 10,000 cubic meters of sewage. It's designed to handle up to 60,000 cubic meters. But every now and again, every 2 to 3 years, there is an extreme wet weather event. And when that happens, the flow through the plant treatment increases from 10,000 cubic meters to 100,000 cubic meters. Now, in most cities, that additional 40,000 cubic meters would be bypassed into Georgian Bay. But in Owen Sound, when this weather hits, our team at the treatment plant pull all-nighters and manages the plant through and treats a maximum of 100,000 cubic meters, which, what is 100,000 cubic meters? That is 100 million liters of raw sewage that plant can treat in a significant event. So, and you know, those bypasses happen very rarely because of the infrastructure and the team that we have down there. So needless to say, I walked away pretty thankful for that group of guys down there. And I would like to move those minutes, Your Worship.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions? I'm going to leave.
I'll just say it's very hard to talk about sewage.
Yeah, you're knee deep into it already. That's what I was going to perhaps suggest. Okay, so call the question. All in favor of approving those minutes? That's carried.
In favor.
Thanks, Marion. Thanks, Brock. It's a good first one. And I hope Matt's not watching, because you're going to have to be friends with him. So we're down to number 15 in our agenda, and we have no postponed matters. We have no motions for which notice was previously given. Discussion of additional business. Ms. Coulter.
Thank you, Worship. Just thanks to the members of the public who came out to our first public engagement session on the city's new official plan tonight. Watch our website for further public engagement, but if you're not one of the 600 plus people who have filled out the survey, it's still up on our website. Please take about 15 minutes and do the survey.
Good, thank you. Any other questions for Pam on that? No. Councillor Thomas?
That's quick. Thanks, Your Worship. I had the pleasure of attending Owen Sound's Cultural Awards yesterday, along with yourself and Councillor Merton and Councillor Gregg. And it was quite an afternoon. It was quite a celebration of arts and culture in Owen Sound. And one of the things I became aware of is we're now up to 10 galleries in downtown Owen Sound, as well as 4 other businesses that show art as a part of their daily operations. And that's really something amazing. We have live music venues in the downtown, and Owen Sound is, by gosh, it's becoming a really exciting place. For all those who think it's sleepy and quiet, and it really is becoming a mecca. And I just wanted to go through the list of the award winners, if that's okay with council. The outstanding group was Look Up Theatre. The outstanding individual in the arts, Stephanie Fowler. The most promising new event was the Owen Sound Art Walk at all of those galleries. The emerging artist was Kevin Griffin, who's a musician in town. The Cultural Heritage Award went to the Guido Sendaway and Walking Together and Marchand Ensemble Tour. The Cultural Catalyst Award went to Community Foundation Grey Bruce. The Outstanding Event went to the Scenic City Film Festival, and the Lifetime Achievement went to Wilmer Nadjawan. And there will be a nice piece in tomorrow's Sun Times on Mr. Nadjawan and his family who were there to accept it. So all in all, it was a well-executed, well-planned event. My compliments to all the winners, my compliments to staff for pulling off an amazing afternoon, and that's all I have to say, Your Worship. Thanks.
Great, thanks. It was really fun to be at, wasn't it? Councillor Dodd.
That's all right. The Young Professionals Network has hit the Chichimon. Isn't that a foghorn? That's pretty good, I thought. All right, so on April 23rd, it's a Thursday, Young Professionals Network is doing another event. This is one that's going to be more of a bigger event than what we've done in the past. So this one is going to be on the Chichimon. It's actually going to set sail before they start their course to go up north. So it'll be leaving Owen Sound off of the Marine Rail Museum, loading there, going out for a quick tour around the harbor, and then coming back. So it's a little bit of a different experience to try to get some, experience with some networking, get some chance for listening to some good music, and having some good food out there, and just really trying to really engage that younger demographic of what's going on in the community. So that is on April 23rd. It is this one is actually it costs money to go to it just because it is on the Chichimon. So it's a $25 charge, and that includes food and the cruise and a sweet band. So it leaves at 6:30, leaves the dock, goes out, goes for the cruise, and it redocks back at 9:30 that evening. So it's a great little event that's going on. If you'd like to sign up for it, once again, it's the Young Professionals Network. So I don't want to confuse anybody. So, but we're very lenient on the young age. So I think most of council and everyone in this room could probably pass because you're all so young looking. But it's if you want to join, it's on the Eventbrite website. It also can be found on the Facebook. Young Professionals Network now has its own Facebook group, a page online. So it's an easy way for individuals to be able to get on there, register any for our future events, as well as being made aware of anything that's going on in Grey County. So art walks, when soccer practices, when online sports registration. It's going to be a new filter, be able to take in all these different aspects of what's going on in the community, and these new individuals, whether they're new or just someone like myself who never leaves. It's an easy way to find out what's going on in the community for younger individuals. So once again, that would be on Eventbrite, and you'd just be looking up Young Professionals Network, the Chichimon Special Edition, $25, April 23rd. Nope, that was a one-time thing.
You said two things, I think. I think that was just one.
Oh, the second one, yeah, the second one would be Brianna's birthday. So to our clerk, happy birthday, Brianna, from all of council and the city.
And you can still go to the Young Professionals thing. Good, thank you. I'm going to add a second thing because it came up. We were talking about the new cemetery policy, and you were talking about, Councillor Thomas was talking about the natural burial site. A number of years ago, the city added a section for Jewish burials that are very specific and have specific timelines. Though the report didn't actually come to the committee until last week, the weekend before, I got an email on Saturday night, early Sunday morning, which I passed off to staff, that we had a Muslim member of our community at the hospice, and they were concerned because they have specific burial customs as well. And I was able to pass it on to Pam, who was able to pass it on to Adam. Phone call was made to the appropriate people, and it was looked after instantly. Even though we didn't really have the plan approved yet, we knew where we were going and were able to accommodate. And that's the first Muslim burial in Owen Sound ever. In the past, they would have, I guess, had to go to Toronto or someplace that had the mosque and those, all the apparatus to go with it. So I thought that was kind of special. And so big thank you to staff to getting that done in like minutes in a day. The other thing I want to speak to is I went down again this year for the 5th year in a row to the Canadian International Auto Show and attended with Cobble Beach, who it's their 6th year that they've had a show on at the Canadian International Auto Show. It used to be called Art in the Automobile, and now it's actually called the Cobble Beach Classics, and this one was Disruptors. Some really, really amazing cars, but that's kind of, well, I guess that's the most important part in the sense, because it's promoting the Cobble Beach Concord elegance. But I've always been of the opinion that Toronto was a tough egg to crack for economic development because it's so big and nobody knows where we are. Kitchener, Waterloo, London, those areas know where we are because they've come cottaging up in the area and camping, etc. for years. So there's more of a natural, we don't have to explain where we are. Over the 5 years that I've been there with Cobble Beach at the auto show, there's 300 to 350,000 people coming through there in a week. It is now one of the strongest parts of the auto show, that Cobble Beach show. And the first year, nobody knew what a Concord Elegance was. No one knew where Cobble Beach was. No one knew where Owen Sound was. And now, after my 5th or 6th year, you're getting people saying, oh yeah, I've got friends that have been there. Oh, I've got friends that have just moved up there. Oh, I'm going to come this year. I came last year. It's putting us on the map in Toronto, which is very interesting. I had one neat experience that I'll share. A couple comes up and they say, our son's looking for a job. Do you have any work up there? Well, what's he do? Well, he's a precision machinist. Beep, 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 beep. Gave him what names to contact, like Brotec, for example, to look. And their next question was, what's the cost of housing up there? And I kind of gave them some averages. And then the next question was, how much fishing is there? And then the next thing was, well, we were retiring from Stony Creek, thinking about Tilsonburg, St. Thomas area. We'll probably be up in Owen Sound to 10 days to have a look. So that's just one, but you talk to 100 people, and this is a great event, and it just shows that Cobble Beach is big to the area, and their car show is becoming bigger to really to North America, but to Ontario especially, and starting to become an economic tool for all of us. So it's great to attend, and look forward to attending. Encourage others to attend in future years too. We can always use more people to be there and talk about. You got to learn how to talk about cars, and that's pretty cool too. Anyway, that's my experience. So I think that, unless there's anything else, covers additional business. Number 18, motion.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself that the Committee of the Whole rise and report.
So all in favor? That's carried.
In favor.
Thanks, Marion. Number 19.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Thomas, that the action taken in the Committee of the Whole in considering public meetings, deputations and presentations, public question period, matters arising from correspondence, reports of city staff, consent agenda, committee minutes, matters postponed, motions for which notice was previously given, and additional business be confirmed by this council.
Thank you. All in favor?
In favor.
That's carried. Are there any notices of motion? Seeing none. Bylaws.
Through your worship, the bylaws listed for approval on tonight's agenda include the confirmatory bylaw, a bylaw to amend the traffic bylaw to provide stop signs at the intersection of 3rd Ave West and 8th Street West, and a bylaw to execute a site plan agreement with Moequidon Native Cultural Resource Center at 1045 3rd Ave West.
Great, thank you. Councillor Dodd?
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, second by Councillor Thomas, that the bylaw numbers 2020-024, 2020-025, and 2020-026 be passed and enacted.
So all in favor? That is carried. So that completes our business for tonight. It is 8:39. We're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.